Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Bittoni. I'm an attorney with Callagy Law's New York Medical Revenue Recovery Department, and this is the second installment of our webinar series for New York PIP's fee schedule. I'm really excited, especially to talk about today's topic, the facility fee schedule, also called EAPG methodology. EAPG methodology is proprietary to a company called 3M. Yes, the same people who make sticky notes and tape. They produce this software that is used for medical billing in both the workers' compensation and no-fault contexts, and it's extremely expensive. I don't have an official quote on hand, but I've heard through the grapevine that it costs something like $15,000 in your first year, and then you have to buy quarterly updates to the software, which I think costs somewhere around $2,000 or $2,500 or something like that. I'm not sure about the exact figures. You can contact 3M if you're interested in the software, but it's very, very expensive. As a result, many providers and even insurance companies don't have the software. And when you get an EOB back from an insurance company for a facility bill, you might say, where the heck are these numbers coming from? What do all these things mean? I see all this stuff on this explanation of benefits, and I don't see it explaining anything, and I don't see how it clearly benefits me. If you are a New Jersey provider and you have just started receiving New York-based EOBs due to the new regulation, which went into effect this year, you may be wondering what's going on. Fortunately, everything is available for free on the internet. Despite the fact that EAPG methodology is proprietary to 3M, New York has required 3M to post all of the materials that you need in order to figure out EAPG rates on the internet. One big problem, it's very difficult to understand the source files because there's no documentation at all. And why would there be? 3M sells the software for a lot of money. Callagy Law has spent a lot of time and effort figuring out how to use these source files, and I'm going to share that information with you today for free. We do this in-house now. We get a lot of settlements on it, and we make arguments to arbitrators and judges about EAPG rates. Although there is some complexity to EAPG methodology, I want everyone to look at this as an opportunity to use source files that other people don't understand, which means that whenever you are on a phone call with an adjuster or when you're arguing to get a better rate for yourself, you will be the expert on that call. If you spend some time in figuring this out like we did, you are going to be the expert, which means that you can come from a position of power when you are negotiating with an insurance company. I will say that in comparison with the physician fee schedule, which is somewhat less complicated and does not require any software at all, there are way more mistakes in EAPG EOBs, most of them underpayments. Due, I think, in part to the complexity of EAPG and the fact that most of the people handling EAPG payments don't understand the underlying methodology, there are some overpayments as well. I don't see any specific systematic bias, but I do see a high error rate. Fortunately, although there are some complexities, if you have a coding background, this is something that you can basically teach yourself to do. I'm going to show you how to use the source files, and with a coding background that you already have or that you have within your institution, this is something that you can learn to do quite well, maybe with about 10 hours of work total. Today, I'll be introducing a lot of the vocabulary to you that makes it difficult to understand the source files. And once you understand the vocabulary, you will have learned about 80% of what you need to know. And then the remaining 20% essentially deals with exceptions to general rules, which you'll need to learn in your institutions on a case-by-case basis. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce a lot of vocabulary and jargon. So if you get lost at any point, it's okay to say in the chat window that you need to stop. It's okay to ask me to remind you of something that we discussed earlier in the webinar that you may have forgotten or that you would like additional clarification on. And basically just feel free to stop me at any time. I'll be monitoring the chat window if anybody has questions. So let's switch to screen sharing and let's look first at an example of what our own Callagy Law internal customized EAPG assessments look like. So here you're looking at a sample EAPG assessment that we did. This is a really simple one for some anesthesia services and some surgical services. And I say it's simple because there's really not a whole lot going on here. Once you understand what all of the words mean, you'll see that this is not a lot of work. This whole thing took me about 10 minutes. I'm going to show you today all of the different source files that I use to be able to put this together, and then I will use this in arbitration and litigation to try to get the best payment rate for our clients. You can also use this internally if you want to do revenue projections, and if you get an EOB and you say, this doesn't make any sense, this was a complex surgery, why does the insurance company think they can pay us $2,000? You'll have a knowledge basis to say exactly why the EOB is underpaying you. Okay, so let's talk about some of the specific vocabulary so that we can understand each of the column headings in the file that I just showed you. I'm going to switch to a different file now, and since we're going to be talking about some technical aspects of this methodology, I want everybody to make sure that you have pen and paper or that you have a document up on your computer so that you can take notes. All right. Here is the formula, the basic formula for dealing with EAPG. Now, let's start with the absolute basics. What the heck does EAPG stand for, and what's the difference between EAPG and APG? All right, so now you're going to want to start taking notes. EAPG stands for Enhanced Ambulatory Patient Group Methodology. Enhanced Ambulatory Patient Group Methodology. APG stands for Ambulatory Patient Group. APG methodology was developed in the 1990s in connection with Medicaid reform, and it has since been adopted by the state of New York for both for the workers' compensation, the no-fault, and the Medicaid contexts. The methodology is exactly the same in all three contexts, but some of the numbers are adjusted in workers' compensation and no-fault so that those payments are more in line with those different kinds of higher paying insurance. Some of the coefficients and fixed numbers are lower for Medicaid. This webinar will focus only on workers' compensation and no-fault contexts. And to refresh from Friday, workers' compensation and no-fault in New York use the same fee schedule, although the underlying laws are often quite different. However, this webinar does apply to both since they use the same fee schedule. All right, so EAPG is a methodology, and it's called Enhanced because it is a customized version that has been purchased by New York. APG methodology is essentially standardized and was developed in the 1990s and has been updated periodically since then. For our purposes, EAPG and APG methodology are essentially the same. They are synonyms. When I'm talking during this webinar, I may use them interchangeably. In addition, we should also distinguish between APGs themselves and the methodology. Again, we're dealing with a lot of jargon, and that's one of the bigger challenges. So if this seems a little bit overwhelming at first, understand that this is basically lexical difficulty. The actual components of figuring out how to calculate an APG rate, it's not that difficult. It's just basic arithmetic and looking things up in charts. So EAPG refers to a methodology that uses an essential component called an APG. And an APG is just a fancy term for a group of codes. The methodology takes different CPT and HCPCS codes that are often performed together, and it creates averaged rates for those groups of codes. If you ever worked with DRGs, you'll find that APGs are conceptually similar to DRGs. Basically, you take a bunch of codes that belong to the same family of procedures, and you give them one standard payment rate. This means that one patient who receives a few more CPT codes in the same APG will get the same payment rate as somebody who receives a few less CPT or HCPCS codes from the same group. This means that one particular patient could be more or less profitable than another patient who receives care within the same group. But if you look at a population of, say, 1,000 patients who all receive similar care in the same groups, those patients should tend to get reimbursed at about the same rate and about the same profitability. Okay, so we talked about what an APG is. And now let's look at the essential components for figuring out how to understand how to pay a specific APG. Now, there are two core ways to look at a bill under APG methodology. The first is figuring out how much each line item is going to be paid. And then we have to figure out how each line item interacts with other line items on the bill. First, we'll start with the line item. And here I'm going to switch to the last sample APG calculation that I showed you. So here we have rates for line items, and then in our packaging, bundling, discounting column, we see that there are certain reductions. That's a result of the line items interacting with each other. So first, let's start with the line items, and I'll show you the different components on each line item. All right, to go back to what we discussed on Friday, from the physician fee schedule, if you were there, some of the information that we talked about will seem familiar to you when we talk about APGs, which are a little bit more complicated. When we talked about the physician fee schedule, we said that each CPT code has a weight, and then you multiply that weight by the conversion factor, and then you get your result for each CPT code. APG line items work in basically the same way. Each line item will be assigned a weight that depends on the group of codes to which a code belongs. Then you multiply by the conversion factor, which in APG methodology is also called the base rate. And then you get your final APG payment. So let's go over that again. We just talked about three things, but you'll see that there's a lot more on this explanation of the line item. And let's talk about why. But the most important thing to understand, first we have the weight, then we have the conversion factor, and then we get our final payment. There's a spreadsheet that tells you what the weight is for each code, and the base rate is basically going to be the same in almost all instances. And essentially, you just multiply these two together, and then you get your final APG rate. As I mentioned, line items interact with each other under APG methodology, and that's why we have an extra column here called packaging, bundling, and discounting. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. For now, just write in the margin of your notes that packaging, bundling, and discounting will cause each line item to go up or down, potentially, from anywhere from 150% for a bilateral procedure, for example, possibly down to 50%, and sometimes down to 0%. Finally, the capital add-on is not something that's complicated at all. Basically, it's a small dollar amount that's added to a bill for each medical visit. It's a fixed rate. It never varies. You get it on every single medical visit. And we'll save that until the end. But understand that once you figure out your weight for your code, your base rate, and your packaging, bundling, or discounting multiplier to get your final rate for each code, you're going to get a little extra money. So hooray, free money, and it's not complicated. But we'll talk about that at the end. It's about $80 that'll get added onto every bill. Okay, so let's look at this in context. Going back to the sample that I showed you before. This is for a shoulder arthroscopy, and let's look at everything that's going on here, given what we just talked about. So first, let's start with this first line item. Here we have our CPT code. Then we have our weight for this code. We have our base rate. And this code is going to get paid at 100%. We're not going to talk about why just yet, because I want you to understand just the basic components. So we have our weight, and our base weight is a dollar value, by the way. So we have the weight for our code, and we have our base rate, and these two get multiplied together, and that gives us our line rate. So for anybody who wasn't here, Clarita, the webinar has already started. If you can't see the video, I will make sure that you get the recording. And if there's a connection issue, I'm going to type that in chat right now as well. Okay, so to refresh from Friday, the weight for each code is essentially an actuarial amalgamation of the intensity of a procedure. So for example, an X-ray will have a much smaller weight than a surgical procedure, and a very, very complicated surgical procedure will have a higher weight than a very, very simple routine surgical procedure. The base rate is going to, unlike in the physician fee schedule, where the base rate has multiple variables that you have to look at, including specialty and medical specialty and the geography of the provider, there are very, very, very few variables that will go into the base rate. For almost all of our New Jersey providers, and for our providers located in New York City, your base rate is going to be $295.94. After today's webinar, I will send out a link so that you can look up all of the base rates that are applicable statewide. And if you have any questions about which base rate will apply to your facility, then just reach out to me. But for almost all of our providers, the base rate is going to be $295.94. Okay, how do we figure out what our weight is for our code? I'm going to show you a lot of different files today, and I'll send all of these to you in an email after this webinar. All of these are available online for free. But unfortunately, they're located on a lot of different websites. Some of them are located on the New York Workers' Compensation Board website. Others are located on the New York Department of Health website. And there's no documentation anywhere. Basically, I sat in front of my computer for a long time, and I found all of these files and then figured out how to use them. So I will send them to you in a single email. But in your notes, you should write the title of each document that we're going to look at and how to use it. I will also include this information in the email that I send you with all of these files. But I want you to start to create your own documentation on this webinar today. So the next file that we're going to look at is called the APG weight table. Again, that's the APG weight table. So here's our APG weight table. Once we figure out which APG a code belongs to, and remember, an APG is just a fancy word for a group. APG methodology groups different CPT codes that are often performed together into the same group and then assigns a single rate to that group. So we figure out which group our CPT code belongs to, and then we look up our weight in this weight table here. The weights are updated over time, but you'll notice that in a lot of cases, the weight for each group stays the same over time. If you find that any particular procedure is being performed differently in practice and that you feel the weights are inappropriate, let me know. There is a legal provision that allows providers and other stakeholders to petition the Workers' Comp Board to have the weight changed for specific APGs. So in the example that I put together for you, we're dealing with a level 2 and a level 1 arthroscopy. And that's basically what we do. We figure out what group we're in, and then we look at our weight by looking at the APG weight table. And then we go back to our spreadsheet that we're working from, and we put that in. So we looked up our APG weight on the APG weight table. The base rate is something that I gave to you, and I'll give you the full information for it, but that's basically going to be the same for everybody. And then we multiply these two together, and we get our line rate. So, okay, not so bad, right? It works in ways that are very, very similar to the physician fee schedule. Each group has a weight. Then you have a conversion factor. And remember, in the APG context, base rate and conversion factor are synonyms. They mean exactly the same thing. And then you get your rate for your code. So, okay, how do we figure out what group each code belongs to? And there's another, of course, there's going to be another spreadsheet for that. And I'll show you what that spreadsheet looks like. This is called the APG Crosswalk Spreadsheet. Again, this is the APG Crosswalk Spreadsheet. And this is actually the very, very first spreadsheet that we're going to look at when we are starting to build our spreadsheet to figure out how much each bill should be paid at. Let's go back to that bill. When I'm putting this together, when I'm working on a case and I'm starting with a blank spreadsheet, the very first thing that I do is I just put all my CPT codes in a column, and then I look to see which groups each CPT code belongs to. So here I have all my codes. The next thing I'm going to do is put a column in my spreadsheet for the APG to which each code belongs. Remember, when I say APG, in this context, it just means group. So I figure out which group every code belongs to. So I will manually look up each of these codes on the APG Crosswalk spreadsheet, and then I figure out which group they belong to. So I start with a blank spreadsheet, and take notes on this as we're going. You're starting with a, if all you're starting with is a bill, that's all you have. Take each CPT code, put it into column A on your spreadsheet. Next, step 2, go to the APG Crosswalk spreadsheet and figure out which APG each code belongs to. So I have my column with codes. Now I need to figure out which APG each code belongs to. So I will pull up the APG Crosswalk table, and I look up what APG each code belongs to. The next thing that we need to know is the kind of APG we're dealing with. There are 3 core types of APGs. And remember, this column says EAPG type. That's synonymous with APG type. EAPG just is a fancy word for enhanced, which means that it's the customized version that the state of New York adopted. The 3 basic types of APGs, and you're going to want to write this down, are significant procedures, ancillary, and incidental. And let's go over that again. The 3 main types of APGs are significant procedures, ancillaries, and incidentals. It's important to understand the type of APG that you're dealing with because that has an effect on the payment rate for each line item. Generally speaking, ancillaries and incidentals will not be paid, except in certain narrow circumstances. Most of the time, when you're dealing with no fault, you're dealing with significant procedure medical visits. This means that somebody comes in for a surgery, or they come in for an MUA, or they come in for treatment. These treatments are almost always going to belong to significant procedure APGs. And when ancillary and incidental APGs are on the same bill as a significant procedure, in almost all instances, the ancillaries and the incidentals will be reduced to 0%. The reason for this is that the cost assessment for a significant procedure includes the cost of ancillary and incidental care that is generally provided along with that significant procedure. This might be familiar to you in some different contexts. For example, in the for the CP code 62323, it used to be that that's an injection, a steroid injection. It used to be that the old code that the AMA updated included imaging guidance, and that procedure was changed to split guidance from the procedure. In APG methodology, you're going to find that circumstances like that, where you have a procedure plus imaging guidance, for example, imaging guidance will typically be included in the cost of the significant procedure, so that line item will be reduced to 0, but you're still getting paid for that service. It just means that the cost is bundled into the cost of the significant procedure. The line item for the ancillary and incidental care gets reduced to 0 because if it weren't, you'd be essentially getting paid twice for the same care. So let's look how that works on the sample that I put together for you. Okay, so here under the anesthesia section of this sample that I put together for you, you see that the significant procedure APGs are paid, and you see that the ancillary line is not paid. So what does this mean for us when we're putting together our assessment? We have one, if we're starting with a blank spreadsheet, the first thing we do is put all of our CPT codes in the same column. Then we figure out the APG that each CPT code belongs to. Then we figure out our APG type. And generally, significant procedures will include the cost for ancillaries and incidentals. So if you have significant procedures on the same bill as ancillaries and incidentals, those are generally going to get reduced to 0. However, you should note that when there is no significant procedure on a bill, ancillaries and incidentals often will get paid. This is because when you have no significant procedure, the ancillaries and incidentals are not included anywhere else in the bill. This means that if an ancillary or incidental occurs on its own, it's probably going to get paid. For example, if a patient comes in for an office visit and they get an X-ray during that office visit, that X-ray is probably going to be payable for that office visit. However, if an X-ray is performed as part of a significant procedure, and that X-ray is generally performed in connection with that significant procedure on a routine basis, APG methodology is probably going to include the cost for that X-ray in the cost of the significant procedure. But when there's no significant procedure, it's just an office visit and an X-ray, the X-ray is probably going to be payable. Okay, let's go back to our calculator. Now, significant procedures also interact with each other. I mentioned that the core calculation you want to come up with is APG weight times base rate. One way that line items interact with each other that we've already talked about is the interaction between significant procedures and then ancillary or incidental care. So here you see that we have a significant procedure and an ancillary, and these are reduced. How do we figure out what's going on there? And how do we know which ancillaries are in fact reduced? Well, there's another file for that. And in your notes, write this down. The file is called the APG Consolidation Table. Note that while ancillaries and incidentals almost always will automatically get packaged with the cost of a significant procedure, different kinds of significant procedures may get consolidated as well. Significant procedures can have their line rate reduced depending on whether there are other related significant procedures on the same bill. And let's look at an example of that. So we're about to look again at the sample calculation that I put together for you, and then we're going to look at a file that I just mentioned, which is the APG Consolidation Chart. So we'll look at our sample, and then we'll look at the APG Consolidation Chart, which is going to show us which significant procedures are consolidated into the cost for other procedures. All right, let's look at our significant procedures on our sample. Here we see that there are 4 codes related to a shoulder arthroscopy. The top 2 codes belong to APG 38. And, oops, I have the wrong weight there. Okay, we see that the top 2 codes belong to APG 38, and that APG 38 has a weight of about 16.17. We also see that there are 2 other CPT codes which belong to a different APG, but this APG is also part of shoulder arthroscopy. And we see that this APG has a much lower weight. When we have multiple significant procedures that belong to different APGs on the same bill, then we need to figure out if any of those different APGs consolidate with each other so that their line rate is reduced. So now we're going to look at the table that I just mentioned, the APG Consolidation Chart. And let me open that file for you. Okay, this is what the chart looks like. It's just a list of APGs, and underneath each APG, you can see other APGs that are consolidated into it. You may also have noticed that I've been using different terms for the interaction of different APGs. Consolidation refers to significant procedures and is synonymous with the term bundling. So consolidation equals bundling, and those terms usually will apply to significant procedures. In contrast, packaging is the term used to describe the reduction of ancillary and incidental line items into the cost of significant procedures. So let's go over that one more time. Consolidation and bundling are synonyms, and they refer to significant procedures. Packaging refers to ancillary and incidentals, but they're essentially the same process. Like I said, part of my role today will be the role of dictionary. I will be giving you a lot of terms so that when you look at the source files, you understand what you're looking at. Okay, so let's go back to our sample, and we see that the 2 APGs for shoulder arthroscopy are APG 37 and 38. So I've got multiple significant procedures on the same bill, and they belong to different APGs. That means I need to look at my APG consolidation chart to see if any of those different APGs will be consolidated. And in this instance, I will scroll down to APG 37 and 38. And also note that lower numbered APGs will, if they consolidate at all, will consolidate into a higher numbered APG. So I'm going to start with my highest number APG, EAPG 38. And OK, I see that 37 is on this, is on here below the section for APG 38, excuse me. So 37 is on the list for 38. That means, going back to our sample, that means 37 is going to consolidate into 38. So 37 is on the chart as consolidating into 38. That means the rate for 37 is going to be reduced to 0, and the rate for this arthroscopy will just be the rate for APG 38. However, next thing we need to look at is modifiers. Before we move on to modifiers, let's talk about everything that's happened so far. We started with a blank spreadsheet. We put our CPT codes in one column. We figured out which APG each code belongs to. And then we figured out the type of each APG. And in this case, our surgery is 4 codes, and they're all significant procedures. When we have multiple significant procedures from different APGs, we need to look at the APG consolidation table to see if any of the lower numbered APGs consolidate into a higher numbered APG. Note that lower numbered APGs don't always consolidate into higher numbered APGs. Sometimes low number APGs and high number APGs are completely different procedures. For example, if somebody had a procedure done on their ankle and their shoulder in the same day or in the same medical visit, those would probably not consolidate. OK, so we looked at our codes. We figured out which APG they belong to. Then we figured out their APG type. We looked at the APG weight from the APG weight spreadsheet, and we know our base rate because I told it to you. And we're looking at our basic line rates. And now we're figuring out packaging, bundling, and discounting based on the fact that there are multiple significant procedures from different APGs on the same bill. And in this case, those different APGs do consolidate with each other. So here we see that the line rate for this code in APG 37 is 0%. And when significant procedures consolidate into a higher numbered significant procedure, that's generally what will happen. But I mentioned that we need to consider modifiers as well. There's an entire spreadsheet for the effect of different modifiers. That's not something I'm going to go into in too much detail today. But it's something that you will need to familiarize yourself with. But it's not super complicated to figure it out. You just look at the spreadsheet, and whatever the spreadsheet says is what you're going to do. One very, very important modifier to be aware of, and I want to go over it today, is modifier 59. Modifier 59 will generally bypass the consolidation effect of APG methodology and result in discounting of the significant procedure rather than consolidation. So in this case, this particular code was coded with modifier 59, which means that this line item gets discounted instead of consolidating. If there were no 59 here, this would get bundled and it would be paid at 0%. However, there is 59, which means that it'll get paid at 50%. Note that almost all discounted APGs will be discounted to 50%, but there is yet another chart to figure out what the discounting rate is for a specific APG. I will email that to you. It's pretty unusual for an APG to discount to something other than 50%, but there are a few that do it, and you should just be aware of that. And you might want to write in the margin of your notes when you are discounting an APG, cross-reference the APG discounting table. Okay. So we talked about what to do with a single line item. We talked about what to do when there are ancillaries and incidentals on the same bill as a significant procedure. We talked about what to do when ancillaries and incidentals occur by themselves. And we talked about what to do when there are multiple significant procedures from different APGs on the same bill. One additional way that line items interact is when there are multiple codes within the same APG. And let's take a look at an example from our sample that I prepared for you. In most instances, when CPT codes all map to the same APG, the APG will only get paid once, and the highest paid code within that APG will get paid, and all of the others will go to 0%. As I mentioned, EAPG methodology is an averaging methodology. So even if the care for one patient is more intense than for another patient, as long as that care belongs to the same group, those patients will get paid at the same rate. Just as with the case of different APGs on the same bill, modifiers can bypass the averaging methodology of the APG system. So in this case, we see that this code was billed with modifier 59, and that means that the second code in APG 38 will get reduced to 50% rather than 0%. If there were no 59 on here, this code would be 0%. Looking at the anesthesia codes, we see a similar result. Our first code here is payable at 100%. Then we see a second code in the same APG. Normally that would be paid at 0% because they belong to the same group, and groups are paid at the same rate. However, there's modifier 59, which means that it's discounted. If we were to cross-reference the discounting chart, then we would find that this APG discounts to 50% if it discounts at all. And here we see there's an ancillary, so that's paid at 0. It's packaged, it's paid at 0%. Okay, so we are done looking at all of our codes and figuring out all of our APG stuff. Finally, onto the easy part, our capital add-on. Awesome, this is the easy part, free money. The capital add-on is $81.37. Why is it $81.37? I don't know. Some actuary somewhere decided that's what it was going to be. That's your free money on your medical visit. You only get it once per medical visit, so that's something to be aware of. But it's a little bit of free money, so hooray. All right, so we talked about a lot of information here. I definitely recommend that you rewatch this video. It took all of us at Callagy Law here a bit of practice, and it's important to understand the vocabulary, and the way that we get good at vocabulary is through repetition. So watch this video again. I'm also going to send you a link to a document called a provider manual. I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that you sit down and you spend several hours, read the provider manual twice. It's a little bit long and it's technical, but if you read this provider manual twice, you will learn 80 to 90% of everything that you need to know about the EAPG methodology. And when you get a bill that says it was paid according to EAPG methodology, you'll actually know what the heck is going on, and you'll be able to spot mistakes. I can almost guarantee you that if you spot a mistake and you call an adjuster and say, hey, I noticed that you consolidated this code instead of discounting it, it should have been discounted to 50% instead of paid at 0%, that adjuster is not going to be able to fight with you on that. You're going to understand this and the adjuster won't. I actually had an arbitrator, and remember, arbitrators are actually supposed to decide how much a bill is going to get paid at. I had an arbitrator who is specialized in no fault ask me what EAPG stood for. This is somewhat complicated, but like we talked about in the beginning, this is an opportunity for us. If you put the time in to learn this methodology, that is going to give you power and it's going to give you leverage, because you will be the expert anytime that you have a dispute over whether something is paid correctly. And like I mentioned, because this is normally done through the use of 3M software, which hides a lot of the underlying source files, the people who are generally working on EAPG payment issues aren't seeing the underlying methodology and don't necessarily know how to argue it. If you can learn to use the source files, this is going to give you power and leverage. Okay, so you're going to have some homework after this. The homework is look for my email. I'm going to send you all of the files that we talked about today. I'm going to send you the provider manual, and in the next day or two, you'll get a link for the recording of this webinar. I want you to watch it again, and I want you to read the provider manual twice. So download all of the files, watch this webinar again, and read the provider manual twice. Also, please forward this to anybody who does any facility billing in New York. I'm pretty sure we're at this time the only firm that really has a lot of this knowledge and is sharing it for free. But there are so many people in the provider community who don't understand this underlying methodology and who don't even have the software because it's so expensive, that I want this knowledge going far and wide. We need to work together so that we can protect our revenue. There is a high rate of underpayments in EAPG cases, and I want everybody to do everything that you can to protect your revenue, and I want to be a resource for you to help you do that. Thank you so much, everybody. Please reach out to me if you have questions. My phone number is 201-261-1700. That's 201-261-1700. My name is Michael Bittoni. I'm an attorney with Callagy Law's New York Medical Revenue Recovery Practice. You can also send me an email at mbittoni@callaghylaw.com. I'll spell that phonetically. It's Michigan, Bravo, India, Tango, Tango, Ontario, November, India @callaghylaw.com. CALLAGY.com. You can also reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thank you so much. I hope that you use this information, and I hope that it gets you more money and that it helps you protect your revenue. Thank you, everyone, for attending.